Okay, so today we're going to discuss the second lab sheet, which is basically Sandstone and how to create a virtual machine so that you can use for your cloud. Now, your cloud exists so that it creates virtual machines and manages them so that you can start them up and share resources to your customers and generally to your users of your cloud system. So in order to build those virtual machines, we need to have the various ingredients for them made available first. And then we need to create a guide, a template as we call it, so that we can start the virtual machine and run it in our cloud. So the first thing that we'll need to do is we need to configure a network. So this will be the network that connects your cloud to Prometheus, which is the virtual machine that you should be working on, and through that to the outside world. So we'll create a custom made bridge network, and we'll connect Prometheus and the cloud itself to the outside world. Once we do that, we need to configure a host. So in OpenNebula, a host is basically a computer that can start up virtual machines. In our case, this will be our Prometheus virtual machine because that has the KVM virtualization hypervisor installed. So we can use that in order to start all of our virtual machines in our little cloud that we're creating. We'll also have a quick look at the data stores. The data stores for OpenNebula are where we basically store all of our data. There are three different types of data stores. The first data store is the image data store that holds all of the images of the virtual machines that we have created. Okay. The second data store that we have is our system data store, and this is where an image that is being run as a virtual machine actually lives while the virtual machine is running. And we have a third data store, which is the file data store, which is basically the space where we store all of the files that our cloud needs to use that don't have to do with virtual machines running. Once we check our data stores, we will create an image. So an image will essentially be sort of like a pre-configured hard drive ready for us to use in our virtual machines. And you'll see we'll create two images today. One of them will be the blank hard drive for the virtual machine, and the other one will be the DVD for the installation of the virtual machine. And once we have our images in place, we'll create a template, which is basically the guide that tells us what a virtual machine actually consists of. How many CPU cores, how much RAM, which network card, which hard drive images, and so on. Once we have that template going, we will basically start up a virtual machine using that template and install Linux inside that virtual machine. So we start with the network. Before you do anything, it's a very good idea that you back up all of the files that are modified in this section. So we're working with the configuration files for the network cards. So that's ENS33 and BR0. So these two files, out of those two files, BR0 doesn't exist. You will create it from scratch. But ENS33 exists in your system, exists inside Prometheus. So you need to make sure that you make a copy of it and save it maybe in your home folder so that you can actually revert back to it later on if you have to. So all you need to do is you need to find those files, edit them, and make them look exactly like they do in the lab sheet. All right. So you need to set a device name, the boot options, and everything else that has to do with everything that has to do with the device, basically. Once you configure this file, you then create a new file from scratch, from zero, call it ifcfgbr0, because this will be your bridge interface that you will create. And you set up all of the information that's in here. The only thing you have to edit is the question marks, of course. This needs to be the IP address of the bridge. The IP address of this bridge will be the same as the IP address was inside your virtual machine, inside your Prometheus. So for example, that would be your host's IP address plus 100. So if you were working on a computer with an IP address of 98, then your Prometheus IP address will be 198. So 198 is what you would put here instead of those question marks. Everything else is the same throughout. Once you replace those two configuration files, you need to restart the network. So you type the command systemctl restart network.service. And once this is done, you can open a terminal and type ifconfig if you like. You should see a BR0 network card with the correct network card settings, with an IP address and everything. And you should still have an ENS33, but it won't have any IP address or anything like that. Okay, so essentially we have replaced your ENS33 network card with a BR0 bridge. Once the networking is sorted between your cloud and your host, you can add that host in Sandstone. So we can tell our cloud that we have a computer that is capable of starting up virtual machines. Before we do that, you need to have access to Sandstone, of course, and we need to make sure that you don't need to run these services every time. So it's two services that we need. It's OpenNebula and OpenNebula Sandstone. You restart them, and then you check config, the send name of the service, and then on. This will basically tell your Linux system to always start these services automatically at boot time, so you don't have to do it every time yourself. You then go to the web browser, localhost 9869, and you go to OpenNebula, you go to infrastructure, and you click on hosts, and you click on the little green button here, which is the plus, so that you can add a virtualization host into your system, into your cloud. You will need the host name of your computer, and that will be the host name of your Prometheus virtual machine. So it will be prometheus.netlab.ee.port.ac.uk. Okay, the easiest way to find this is if you open a terminal and type host name in the terminal and press enter, so it will give you the name of the computer. So it will give you the host name so that you can use it. Okay, you click create, and it will start initializing, and then it will turn on. There's one thing that can go wrong here. It might give you an error, and if that happens, it will either be a host name problem, so maybe you misspelled the host name itself, or you haven't enabled the passwordless SSH authentication correctly in the previous lab sheet. So that was the editing of the config file in the .ssh folder in the one admin's profile. So it's towards the end of the previous lab sheet. So that has gone wrong, and that's why you cannot basically communicate with the host that you just added, because you cannot communicate without password through SSH. Once your host is running, you can check the data stores. You don't need to do anything on this one. Just go to storage data stores. You should have 3 pre-configured data stores, so image, system, and files. If they're there, leave them as they are. If they're not, you need to tell me about it. They should be there. And with that in place, we can go to add a network inside our cloud. So you go to the networks tab, add a bridge, go to the config, and tell it to use the bridge BR0 and using this physical device of ENS33. Then you go to address, set up your first IP address, and give it a size of 1 and click create. The first IP address that you need to use on your computer is not going to be this. We've had a bit of a problem with bridged IP addresses in the lab lately. So when you get to that stage, you need to basically let me know. All right, and I can provide an IP address for you. So if you're doing it offline, not during the lab session, you can basically send me an email, and as long as you tell me which computer you're working on, so your VLAN number, and as long as you tell me your username as well, so I'm user VM2 on VLAN 65, I will reply to you and I will give you an IP address that you can use for your computer while you're doing that. All right. Once we have the networking in place, we can add some images. We'll need those images to use them for our virtual machines. So we'll need two images at this point. The first one will be the DVD installation source, essentially, because we will be installing an operating system onto our first virtual machine in our cloud. So what we need is we need the CentOS Linux DVD ISO. All you need to do is go to centos.org, click on Get CentOS Now, find the CentOS Linux DVD ISO. We need version 7, mind you, not version 8. Okay. And you just need to copy the link location and paste it in the path box in Sandstone. So you'll create an image, you're telling the image that it is a CentOS read-only CD-ROM, you're giving it the path to the address on the website where the ISO image is, and when you click create, then your cloud will automatically go online, get that image, download it, and create the image for your installation DVD ISO. Now, this will take a while. This can take, depending on your network connection, it can take 10-20 minutes. However, while it's downloading and preparing, you can still move on to the next steps. Okay, so you can actually create the second image as well. So you add another image, you name it vPrometheus 0. You change the type to generic storage data block, select yes to the persistent option, choose empty disk image, give it a size of 10 gigabytes, and go to advanced options and find the mapping driver as QCOW2 and create it. This should be created and be ready immediately as soon as you do this. Okay, so you have the DVD and you have the blank hard drive ready for you to install the operating system on it. Once you have those two images, you can then go to the template section and add a template. So this is where we create the characteristics of our virtual machine. So we'll go to templates, VMs, create a new template, name it VP0, use KVM for the hypervisor, give it 2 gigabytes of RAM and 1 CPU, and then move on to the storage tab and select CentOS for disk 0 and disk 1 and vPrometheus 0 for it. You then go advanced options for disk 1. In the image mapping driver field, you need to select QCOW2. Some students have reported this year that this doesn't actually exist. So if it doesn't, then that's fine. It just means that in the newer version of OpenNebula, they've done away with the need for this QCOW2 driver to be defined explicitly there. So that's not a problem. And then go to the network tab and select the bridge for your network card. You then go to OS and CPU, select x86-64 for the architecture. You need to check the boxes for disk 1 to be the first boot and disk 0 to be the second boot device. Then you go to input output and select VNC, which is how you will actually connect to this virtual machine, and click create and your template should appear. At this point, before you go to the next step, you need to stop and wait for your DVD image to become ready. Okay, so if you've done up to here, you can do up to here with the image still downloading the DVD ISO. However, from here on, the image needs to be ready. So you need to wait until the image is finished downloading the DVD from online and becomes ready. Once the image is ready, you can add a virtual machine. So you can go to the last step, you can go to instances, VMs, and click add. Select VP0 from the template, leave the name as it is to VP0, check that capacity, disks, and network are all correct as per your image settings, as per your template settings, and then click create. The VM will be created, it will obtain your first usable IP address, and its status will be prolog for a while, and then it should change to booting and then running. You can now click on the VNC icon, which is the little blue screen monitor on the far right corner of the line. And once you click on that, a new tab will open on your browser, and you will be greeted with the installation of the operating system of CentOS for your virtual machine. Choose a GNOME desktop installation, follow all the rest of the steps. You will need to give it the networking information statically, so you will need to give the IP address and everything else to it. And then once it's finished, it should reboot, and you should have a working virtual machine. And that will be the end of the lab sheet. So essentially, the story is you create a virtualization host in your cloud. Once you do that, you check that it has the correct data stores. Once you do that, you create the network card in the cloud, you create the images in the cloud, you create the template in the cloud for those images, and then you go and you start up that template as a virtual machine in the cloud, and you build it with CentOS 7. All right.